Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We talk about politics, business, culture, news, trends, anything you need to know as a change-making Fort Worthian who shows up every day. I know we missed you last week with President's Day, but we're excited to be back. And it is already 80 degrees in February. I'm already concerned for the summer. We might have to just go on a big break and move for the summer.
Well, you know, I have been asked if I would consider teaching here in the summertime. And the thing that holds me back is the requirement that I have to be in Texas in June, July, and August. So I think I
teaching like university or teaching?
Yeah, ETA.
Cool. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
What would be the class?
Oh, like planning classes.
Nice. Hey, and you know what? That's the big topic.
That is.
So I'm really excited for this big topic because we have a lot of examples of how planning either goes well or bad in our Metroplex. And we're going to go through them because it shows you why this topic is so important, even when it's not as high pressure as it is right now for some of these folks we're going to be bringing up in the big story. How this episode and how this show works is we do 3 short stories, 1 big story, and then wins and losses. We're going to dive into short story number 1, which is the elections going on right now.
Right. And you've done your civic duty and I have not.
Yes. I feel like once I did something that you haven't done. You know, I was telling my wife this, I was like, yeah, I did my duty and I went and voted in the Democratic primary. But then honestly, I was like, but all these options are everyone here is good people. None of them, I felt like, oh, I really don't hope this person wins. And so I almost felt like it would have made sense to vote more in the GOP primary because there's literally a difference between a sane person who maybe is a little bit sketch with school vouchers, Craig Goldman, or someone who's crazy, into the next, Christian nationalist stuff, which is just different level. So it's anyway, story number 1, Bud Kennedy in the Sunday paper writes a story about how voting in a GOP primary matters more than in November. And he talks about how only 7% of Texans voters will choose the state's next leaders. And obviously, as a state, that usually comes out of the Republican Party. I'll stop there. What was your take of seeing this article?
Well, it was interesting because when you sent this, you pointed out the fact that Bud was possibly suggesting something that you have suggested, and that is voting in the primary that has races that could make a huge difference in who is successful in the outcome. Yeah. And he does some funny descriptions of things when that point about 7% of Texans voting, and in what seems more like the old cowboy cartoon election of the meanest hombre in the valley, and describes some of the videos and mailers that are being sent out and various races. And I have gotten a few of those at my house. And so, he points out that Texas Republicans used to be smart business leaders. They built highways and lakes and airports and universities and all the things that make Texas great. And now they're targeting folks and calling them woke and liberal, just for kind of continuing to do those kind of things that were done in the past.
And come on and talk about this whole 70. He said over half the people who have voted are 70 or older in this election.
Well, we do know that older folks do take their voting seriously. And as, someone who's taken my voting seriously my entire voting life, I think that it is an important piece to look at. I don't think that it's fair to say that all old people or all people over 70 don't care about the future. But I do think that they have some different priorities necessarily than maybe some younger folks. And even if they did vote the exact same way that maybe I would vote or somebody in their 20s or 30s would vote, it doesn't relieve you of the responsibility of going out and voting. So it's sad that so few people vote. It's sad that so few young people vote. There are lots of options and opportunities to vote. Most election offices will be open all weekend. It's, when this drops, it'll be Monday again. So you have until March 5th, between now and March 5th, to figure out what you're going to do. There's still some early voting times left. And on March 5th is actual election day.
Yeah. That is just what I can tell you by voting is that number seems true. Everyone in the room besides me were 70 or older. But I really enjoyed my voting experience though, and that was really nice. So
It did say that 55% of the Democratic primary voters are women. So I guess women are getting out in the Democratic primary more than men are.
Yeah. And I mean, but there's a whole conversation. I mean, I have to find that graph. I was actually talking to some of my friends about it, how one of the big polarizations of voting is women voting Democrat and men voting Republican. But when you get really into the younger ages of 25 and 35, it's like dramatically different. And then they were trying to link it. The whole story was trying to link it to dating and like how hard it is people are dating because the politics between genders are so separate right now.
What's important to women, maybe not so important to men, but I think it should be just as important to them.
Yeah. But anyways, he also ended the article talking about, I like the analogy. He says, choosing a primary is like choosing a supermarket. Go where there's the best selection. There's not about how you're voting for president. This is about what kind of leaders run Texas. I honestly, I know we've always felt like this is an odd approach, but when most people are independents, if you're an independent, listen to this. I think you go vote in the GOP and make sure the most sane person gets elected.
Although he did indicate that if you really feel the need to vote in the Democratic primary for South Fort Worth County Commissioner, I understand.
Yes.
Which is my county commissioner. So I think he's given me permission to stick with what I've normally done and vote in the primary that I've always voted in.
And his recommendation was if you're an independent, vote in the Texas primary. Like, don't wait till November.
Absolutely don't wait till November. Everybody needs to vote in the primaries. That is something that does seem to think people don't seem to realize the importance of voting in the primary.
Transitioning to Tarrant County news, which we're going to start with election news as well, because Tarrant County commissioners deny Trinity Metro funding to provide free rides to the poll. Tarrant County commissioners voted 3-2 along party lines Wednesday not to contribute funding to Trinity Metro's free ride to the polls locations. The Election Transportation Partnership Service has been in place since 2019. The county has not provided funding every year. It provides voters free rides to polling locations along fixed routes on election days and during early voting. Trinity Metro asked for a $10,000 reimbursement for providing the service for primary elections, which represents a 50-50 split. Trinity Metro did not immediately return a message requesting comment.
But our judge indicated that the county should not subsidize the service and said that public subsidization of transportation to the polls goes against federal law, citing a case in Wisconsin. But he believes it's not the responsibility of county government, but it literally is the responsibility of county government because they run the elections.
And that everyone has a right to have access to a free
ability to get to the polls. I mean, they fund roadways, and so they're basically subsidizing people to drive in their cars. So I think that it's not out of line to be helping people vote. But apparently,
it looks like Democratic Roy Brooks took issue with O'Hare's comments and the motion to reject funding. Brooks said it's the country's responsibility to make voting as accessible as possible. Manny Ramirez told Star Telegram in an interview that he voted against the subsidizing of Trinity free rides of voters because many in his district wouldn't be able to use the service. My citizens in Azle, Saginaw, Blue Mound, and Sampson Park, they're not getting the benefits that everyone in Tarrant County would have been paying for. Ultimately, if there's a solution in the future that looks at transportation issues to the polls and there's some common sense solutions there or nonprofits that want to plug in and help, that's great. But ultimately, I don't think Tarrant County taxpayer dollars should be utilized when not every Tarrant County taxpayer or citizen is benefiting.
Well, maybe we should just expand public transportation to all those places that he's talking about don't have that service as of now.
But like at the end of the day, I am going to take that quote from him and use that for everything when his people benefits from free high quality schools, or when his people benefits from a new mall or a new company getting moved over there, and we subsidize that company who's not giving jobs to the people in the South Side. So it's like at the end of the day, you got to stay consistent if you're going to use your opinions. And then especially, you're going to share them with the news, and we're going to all see them. So you can't say that and then expect your people to benefit from things that other
people are paying for.
Yeah, that we're all, technically we all pay for things that we don't benefit from. But here we go. So this short story number 2 is about Tarrant County. And so we are just starting with one of 4 stories in this section. So we're just giving you update on Tarrant County news. The one good news that came out of Tarrant County, and to me was a very historical moment in just progress as a whole. Tarrant votes to bring back inmates from private prison. This is a Star Telegram article by Noah Batch. Tarrant County commissioners voted Wednesday to bring back inmates they sent to a private prison near Lubbock after jail was found to be out of compliance with Texas standards. In their last meetings, Tarrant County commissioners voted unanimously to terminate the contract of 500 beds with Giles W. Dalby Correctional Facility in Post, which is, I guess, near Lubbock. The prison is owned by Utah-based Management and Training Corps. The plan has inmates back in Tarrant County in September, but that is with contingents on how quickly contractors finish work on HVAC systems in the jail towers.
Yeah, we need to make sure that the heating and air conditioning systems are working, I guess, before we bring prisoners back.
Yeah, and the part that I felt like Ramirez, so since this is a county conversation, there's a lot of quotes from the commissioners, and they really like to be in the news, it feels like. But it just seems, I don't like that they blame the MTC failure of not knowing the report on, like, it's like not our county's responsibility to make sure we're getting those reports. Like, I just can't believe that the amount of money we're giving Garza and that you were unaware of the report and now you're blaming the outside failures of that on them. Just seems like this should have been a part of the contract that you would get notified, or part of the process and procedures that you should get notified.
Yeah, if you have that big of a contract with someone, you should have regular reports that you're getting from them. So if you haven't gotten one, then it's on you also.
Yeah. And the whole commission and their team is just blaming, how did we not know about this? Well, because the contract should have had this in the process and flow. But yeah, I mean, this was kind of a good news just because I think we've had a lot of big issues with the for-profit prison. And again, it takes a lot of funding out.
And we talked about this several times and went to that town hall that Commissioner Simmons had. And so this is kind of catching everybody up to where things stand on that.
Yeah. All right, so number 2, this one's hot and new. This one was good. I mean, this was so hot and new, it got Ann's husband fired up, and that's something that we usually don't see from him. Is this
He's
in the
definitely
news.
not as fired up as I am about these things. But this morning when he was reading this article, he sounded like me. He was like, "Oh my God, can you believe this?"
So go ahead and bring us in what.
So there was an article in Star Telegram titled "Tarrant OKs Sale of Forfeited Guns by Sheriff's Office." So in a party line vote again Wednesday, the Tarrant County Commissioners Court approved the sale of 21 forfeited firearms by the Sheriff's Office to gun distributors in Texas and Arizona. The 5 commissioners approved the bid in a 3-2 vote after hearing from 4 citizens who asked that they reject the measures, citing various concerns. Republican Tim O'Hare, Carrie Fickus, and Manny Ramirez voted for the sale, which was opposed by Democrat Roy Charles Brooks and Elisa Simmons. Of the 21 guns, 18 will be sold to Pro Force Marketing Incorporated, based in Arizona, and 3 will be sold to Pflugerville's-based GT Distributions Inc. And the total sale price will be $46,322. So our sheriff said in an email statement that the guns were seized from people who possessed them illegally, but he did not specifically say what kinds of guns were being sold. These guns will be sold to legal gun dealers who will then have the option to sell them to citizens who complete the necessary background checks to own firearms.
$46,000 for 21 guns. As for someone who knows nothing about guns, I thought, like, one, how can someone afford guns if they're really that expensive in the first place? Because here's where my brain is not computing. That 21 guns for $46,000, that is over $2,000 per gun. And we're selling it to the business to then resell and eventually make a profit. So what tag are they pitting on these guns? What kind of guns are these? Like, I thought handhelds and like little guns were like...
I don't know anything about guns, so I cannot give you any insight into this.
I don't understand, like, how are people walking around with $2,000 firearms illegally? I just thought you can go into Walmart's and a normal academy for like $120 and go pick you up some. I'm just confused on just the highness of the cost and what kind of, guns are we talking about? So that it's just an odd thing. On top of, like, again, anyone who's listening to this pod has watched a movie where bad cops take drugs or guns from a neighborhood and then sells them back to the people, and like the bad cops, this is like their side hustle and how they make money and live. Our actual county is doing it. Like, we're not even back doing it behind closed doors. We're doing that with guns in front of us. And I just think that is outside crazy.
Yeah, I mean, they did indicate that they're only going to sell them to people who've passed the background checks and all of that. So I still would rather that they just not be back out on the street.
Yeah, like, that's the thing. Like, you wouldn't put the drugs back out on the streets. Like, you would hold them.
And it's not money that they spent that they're being reimbursed for. So, I mean, maybe it's because they want to get this $46,000. But I'd be curious to know what that $46,000 is going to go towards. I mean, I would hope that it would go towards ending gun violence.
Yeah, yeah. And that, I mean, that I could get on board in that. You get $46,000 to, like, you know, goes to a nonprofits fighting gun violence. Like, that'd be a step. But anyways, this is the more updates on Tarrant County and what's going on there. The next story we want to hit on is just an update on the Tarrant Health Director. There were some accusations about him, and so he wrote a letter about those accusations. This is Vinny Taneja's. He had a response to 3 allegations against him by Chandler Merritt, which is the new hired county administrator. And so I felt like I read this story. It was a difficult story to read because there's just a lot of, then this happened and this happened. But at the end of the day, I guess, like, to me, the story, which you'll have a link to, I guess the synopsis of it, it just feels like this is very political. And again, Vinny Taneja probably has different views, and how he was handling COVID as a health professional is different than how GOP's propaganda aligns with COVID. So it just seems like there's a lot of heat in this kitchen for the last couple of years, and people trying to tag people and get people in trouble. And, you know, a great example of this is Elisa Simmons voted against it.
Against the firing.
Yeah,
and
against
Commissioner
the firing.
Brooks did too. And Commissioner Brooks went on to say that he has been the best public health director the county has ever had, and that he is a magnificent human being, and he wished him really well in his future endeavors because his service here has been impeccable.
My mama ain't even called me a magnificent human being. Like, that is some glory right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like that. So anyways, like, that's the part here. But do you want to kind of talk any about the weeds that maybe like perked your ears, like this like whole situation?
Well, I mean, it was interesting because before I started co-hosting this podcast with you, there were times when you and Jimmy would talk about things, and I, knowing more about the inner workings of things, or the you know, just the details of how a city works or a county works, would have some opinions about the hot takes that sometimes you and Jimmy would have. And sometimes I'd text you about those, which is, I think, how I ended up on this pod. But so I always tend to be a little hesitant to chime in and say, you know, whether or not something was handled properly. The 3 things that were called out here as reasons for saying that he had not done a good job and warranted, you know, being let go, I think, to me, just from a news article, didn't seem like big enough deal, or infractions even, because they even say that there were no laws broken in some of this stuff. So, like I said, I am hesitant to make hot takes about things I don't know all the details of, but I tend to have similar opinions about our former health director that were expressed by Commissioner Brooks.
Yeah. So like, again, we remember Hyder Garcia, another competent, high quality person doing their job. We're losing these people. And this is just in a matter of one transition from Glenn Whitley and his team, who has now passed the torch. And it just seems like not only have we lost consistent leadership, but we're also losing all those COVID and pandemic dollars that made all of our data look good.
And many of these hard times came about during COVID, which was an incredibly difficult time to do these jobs.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So anyways, that's the wrap of Tarrant County. We get one good progress with the Garza jail, but again, kind of everything else is kind of going in the direction. So continue to vote for your people in before March 5th.
There you go.
All right. So now we're going to move into another big topic, and that is education. We were talking about Fort Worth ISD, the enrollment in the last couple episodes. We talked about the new grading system and just a lot of tough things going on in the district. Another one of those things is the let go of employees. Fort Worth ISD has cut 133 jobs to make up budget deficits. The district says 129 of the 133 jobs that were cut were from funding through COVID dollars rather than from tax dollars. That's money that the North Texas no longer is receiving. We have Stephen Poole, the executive director of United Educators Association. Don't know what that organization is or what's the stance of that organization.
He speaks for teachers.
Okay. It's a shame they had to get to this place of cutting positions. A lot of districts try to manage their staff by cutting positions if someone retires or resigns and just not filling the position. Fort Worth was the first one to jump out there with true layoffs, Poole said. Fort Worth ISD provided us with the resolution that outlines which jobs were cut. Many of those were the Division of Technology, assessment data analysts, freshman success coaches, and Leadership Academy Network instructional specialists. I know you have friends in this space. I know you care deeply about this space. What do you got to say here?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't dove deeply into it with friends of mine that are teachers, but I do know that they're definitely concerns. They did make it very clear that child outcomes of students in classrooms was of utmost importance. So they were technically saying that they were trying not to make these cuts in places that might directly impact student success. But I'm not sure how you don't affect student success when you're cutting technology. I know some folks who have had a real hard time getting the services that they need for the technology that is in schools, and we're relying a lot on technology in schools these days. So I'm not sure how those needs are going to be addressed if we don't have the folks that are in the Division of Technology. And then freshman success coaches, I think, are literally there to make sure that people coming into freshman year of high school are successful. And that's a big transition. So I can't see how that would be a positive thing to see that go away. And then the Leadership Academy Network is, I think, a partnership between some universities and schools. And so I don't know the details of what that impact is going to be on those leadership academies, but those leadership academies have been held out to be very successful endeavors. And so maybe they're so successful that this small cutback in staff is not going to affect the overall success of those programs, but it just seems very...
And this is on the top of enrollment decline in Fort Worth ISD. We've lost nearly one of every 5 kids since 2016. You know, when you look at the drop and decline of enrollment, we're only... we're the only people who are losing people similar to us or more is LA Unified in Los Angeles, Philly ISD in Philadelphia, and New York. And so when you talk about those three being very different states and very different situations, but Fort Worth ISD is up in that level of enrollment declines. We also still need 200 teachers.
Yeah, that's what I was just noticing. So we're having all these layoffs, but we need to hire more teachers. So.
And technology does help us do more with less. But I am in this space with my day job. And so weirdly, I think all the things that Superintendent Ramsey's had to do that are tough, I also understand. I think what always challenges me with the education sector is that they just don't understand money and business. And I think at the end of the day, Fort Worth spends $800 million. That's our budget to service kids. That is the same amount of money that Tupperware brands make a year. That is the same amount of money that American Eagle makes a year. That's the same amount of money as Papa John's makes a year. Chewy's Mexican restaurant, BJ's restaurant, is the same size as our district's annual budget. Think about that. And so at the end of the day, I also think like this is a true thing we have to look in the mirror is like as schools, and schools are way different than pizza, Tupperware, and Mexican tacos. Let's be clear. But we have to understand that we have to change the way that we're doing. So another story is Superintendents Fort Worth ISD won't close schools until studies are complete. This was a Fort Worth Report article.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to make decisions about school closures. I think you need to do a thorough investigation and study as to, you know, what the state of the union is before you make those kind of decisions.
Yeah, and when closing buildings, there will be closed. You won't need as many positions that were led to the building, right? So there could be some situations where we have to transition staff to different buildings to service. But what the work that I'm in is very simple. We see that student support services are only available during the day when kids are in class. Yet we spend like 8% to 10% of our school budget on support services for kids during the day when they're in class. That would be like the grocery store open when teachers are at work. Kids need these resources, but I'm in class. So the freshman coordinator thing kind of to me is like, I appreciate you gave me a coordinator, but I'm currently in a building with a schedule that I have to stick to, or I'm going to be tardy or attendance. So like what we do at our organization is we provide student support services beyond the school day so kids can get support when they actually need it. So that districts are finally adapting to the student rather than the student having to adapt to the system, because it's inequitable, because not all kids can stay after school. Not all kids can skip lunch. Not all kids can come to school early. So I am also an example how schools need to think differently and actually think of sustainable student-centered solutions. So at the end of the day, I feel that there is things like what I do in 500 schools and across 23 states. I'm in Philly ISD. I am in LA Unified. I am in Clark County. I'm in DeKalb County. I don't have a single kid in Tarrant County that I service. And so Fort Worth is still running schools like it's 2004. And they're now realizing you can't be Blockbuster anymore. And it's time to wake up in a Netflix world. And unfortunately, this is the consequences and the bridge that it's going to take to get there.
Yeah, I think, and the thing that comes up for me when they're talking about closing schools is a couple of things that are going to come up in our later story. And that is kind of where schools are located and how that serves a community and how people come and go from those schools. And we had an article previously, I don't know if we talked about it on the pod, that talked about busing kids around and how kids at schools of choice were having to wait longer and sitting in cafeterias after school for buses and whether the bus system worked for them. And so when we look at closing schools, it's not just a matter of how many kids are attending those schools, but how do people get to those schools? And then if you do end up closing some schools, what do you do with those buildings? I know somewhere in one of these articles it talked about, closing a school isn't necessarily reducing the cost to the district because they still have to maintain and make sure that that building doesn't get vandalized. Well, I think if you're going to close a school, you need to make sure something else is happening with that building, not just that you're sitting there mothballing it and it sits there like an eyesore in a neighborhood. Yeah. If you're going to close a school, you need to start talking about adaptive reuse of those buildings. And some of those older buildings could be adaptively reused for housing, which is another thing that we have a lack of in our community. So, I mean, it's a way bigger conversation, and it's not just an isolated, siloed conversation within the school district.
But I also think there's a cool opportunity there to build, like for old schools that are in communities, with, a lot of adult learners today. You have there's a lot of people who are, that are getting GEDs from Fort Worth ISD and diplomas.
Yeah, so those could be used for other things that would be beneficial to the community. So I'm not saying sell them off for housing, that's the answer. I'm just saying that these are conversations that need to happen with all of the stakeholders involved. And I hate seeing neighborhood schools go away because I'm one that likes people to be able to get to their school and not have to take a bus or be driven by a parent. But the way we're picking places where schools go now, we're putting them out in the middle of nowhere and then running into other problems that we'll talk about in the big story.
Yeah. And so, and a lot of this, kids get paid, you get paid by the attendance. And there's just, since the pandemic, there's been a serious attendance crisis. I'm looking at an economist article that I've shared many with my educator friends, but they're looking at United States school pupil absence for 10% or more of the academic year. So this is the percent of students who are absent 10% or more of the academic year. In Alaska, 48%. New Mexico, 40%. Michigan, 38%. Oregon, 36%. Nevada, 35%. Now, they don't have Texas in here, but Texas is not, they have the lowest 5, and the lowest 5 is around 18 to 22%. So we're somewhere between 20 to 30% of our kids in Texas are missing 10% or more of the school year, which would be one of every 10 days. So that means for every 2 weeks, a kid misses school. And so that also just changes the dynamic of how you support a kid. And you have all these rural Texas schools going to 4 days instead of 5 because they can't find teachers to be there for 5 or their resources are being shrunk. So there's just a lot of changes we have to do. And so that to me also goes back to why like innovation and technology maybe not should have been the place to cut because we have to start thinking differently.
Well, and also I just scrolled down further in the article where they're talking about Ramsey called on the Fort Worth City Council to lure affordable housing developers to the urban core because families are leaving Fort Worth ISD because they can't afford housing in Fort Worth. And so that's why they're moving to some of those outlying districts. And Elizabeth Beck, council member for District 9, was glad to hear Ramsey ask for more affordable housing. So I think the more people on board for affordable housing, the better.
Yeah. And schools have to be, schools have to be, to me, the only way you solve it is we instead of me. And I know that's hard, but like it has to, I was just in Japan, Okinawa, Japan. The island has 1.5 million people. The kid that was in elementary was going to a school with 1,000 other elementary kids. They had one school in Itoman, Okinawa, one school. All the kids went there.
And I bet you they're not missing as much school. That's for sure.
And so, anyways, so let's go ahead and move into the big story. The big story is going to be a topic that we often talk about when it comes to looking at urban design and the future planning of Fort Worth and Tarrant County. But we just had so many articles because we missed last week that actually gave us examples of why planning is so important.
And this was your idea. I want everyone to know this was EJ's idea, not Ann's idea. That would be very self-aggrandizing for me to be like, planning is so important. But you said to me, I think that this topic is going to be really something you're going to be excited about because I think that all these stories play into why planning is so important.
Yes. So when you have the queen of planning, the sultan of transportation right here, we are in for a treat. We got 5 stories that are actually really they're true examples of what happens when we don't think. So I'm excited to get into them. So, Ann, lead us through.
So the first story we have is Fort Worth is concerned about a new state law that allows developers to city shop. And I think you were presented as a planning commissioner, a presentation on this, and I witnessed a presentation to the city council on this topic where the city of Fort Worth has plans to bring water and sewer to some acreage in a master plan development that's rapidly growing out in Parker County, but a new state law abruptly changed those plans because it gave developers and property owners that are in the city's extraterritorial jurisdiction, which is the ETJ. This is land that is within 5 miles of the boundaries of the current city limits that the city has some control over. So like they can control how property is divided in those areas and some other kind of code requirements, but they don't impose zoning and some of the other things. And it's the ETJ. So you may pay county taxes, but I don't believe that you're paying any city taxes. But you also are not getting the services that you get within the city when you're in the ETJ. But the ETJ is available to be annexed into the city.
Are you allowed to vote?
I don't think you vote in city elections. You just vote in the county elections. And so that's part of why the state came up with this new rule. They were saying that cities shouldn't be able to tell property owners what to do with their property when they are not people who get to vote for those people that are making those regulations. Mm-hmm. And so they gave property owners the option to opt out of being basically in the extraterritorial jurisdiction, therefore not being available to be annexed into the city. And the city has planned for the ETJ for a long time because if the city is going to annex something, they want to make sure that they're ready and able to service those areas with things like water and sewer and police and fire and all of that. And so you don't just flip a switch and bring an area into the city limits and have all that ready. You have to make long-range plans for that. So with this change in the law, some of these property owners can more easily just say no to the city. Now, this is a double-edged sword for me because the city of Fort Worth's current city limits are very big, and we are sprawled beyond belief, and we struggle to provide services to these areas as it is. And so if we were to annex all of the stuff in our ETJ, which then just extends what our ETJ is, another 5 miles from where the boundary of the city grows to, we will continue to have to be servicing this more sprawly pattern of development. And I'm not really a big fan of that. And so years ago, when the city said they were no longer going to be annexing, except for when individuals asked to be annexed, I thought that was a good idea. And I also thought that maybe we should even have second thoughts about what we accepted of property owners who wanted to be annexed. Because if you look at the return on investment for some of this type of development, the taxes that are collected from, say, a single family development is not enough to cover the expense of the water and sewer and police and fire. And eventually these people are going to be like, well, we want a community center too, and we want a library too, and we want this and we want that, and we want all the other things that people have more in the core of the city. And the taxes that are collected from those individual property owners does not cover that nut. And so it is not a sum gain for the city to bring that type of development into the city. And in here, there is some discussion from city staff talking about, if it's industrial land or if it's commercial land or if it's mixed use land, that return on investment can be higher. And so therefore it could be a net gain for the city and not a drain on the city's coffers. But the concern is that this is leading to people being able to city shop. But if you read the article, it pretty much looks like all the cities are working together and cooperating with each other and agreeing to what they will allow to be taken by another city. And so it's not going to be up to these individual property owners to city shop, quote unquote, because the cities adjacent to Fort Worth are working with Fort Worth to discuss what they would take and what they would not take. And therefore, it would be between those two cities to decide if something ends up in each of their ETJs and available for annexation.
Yeah, the part that to me is just really crazy is that the city currently has around 265 square miles in official growth boundaries.
So that's area outside the city of Fort Worth that could be Fort Worth.
And that area is the size of El Paso. That's how much square miles El Paso is, which is one of the largest cities in Texas.
Getting back to what I said, I don't think we should be looking to expand the boundaries of Fort Worth. If there's something adjacent to Fort Worth that would be beneficial to the city to include it in the city, I think that's fine. But this reaching out and growing and growing and growing and then having to provide services for all of that, not to mention transportation. If a lot of houses are being built out there and then the answer is just to widen highways, that's not going to work. And we're going to end up with a bunch of congestion. And I just think that I'm not sure that I'm excited about annexing more into the city.
Yeah, so it's just fully interesting because now you're also just having people creating like splotches of independent land, I guess, where they can feel free to create whatever they want. And then we're having to deal with the consequences later with whatever happens around it. But
it's interesting because that's why ETJ, I think, was created, was to make sure that there was some level of requirement in development so that if the city did bring something into the city, it wasn't just some terrible thing that needed to be cleaned up completely or that was polluted or substandard as far as the water, sewer, streets, all that.
So this is an interesting topic, and it just shows like the impacts of sprawl and when you have a lot of land and we really start thinking about how do you develop a city. I don't know if there's really a true city of what's the right square miles to build a city because it all kinds of deal with your physical location and what kind of natural borders are around you. And unfortunately for Texas, we're nice and flat and we can let this sprawl ride. So hopefully we can figure out, we have to wake all of us up as citizens to realize that is not what we want out of our our cities.
Yeah, I would rather not do the sprawly thing.
The next thing that impacts our next story here is this EMS emergency model. We talked about the EMS Fort Worth MedStar contract and just how.
Yeah, a couple pods ago, they were having lacked some funding that they needed, and they came to the city requesting some additional funding to shore up their budget. And in the end, I think they got reimbursed by JPS for some transports that they were doing and didn't end up needing that that subsidy from the city. But I think even before that happened, there was ongoing consideration of some different EMS models that could possibly be done in Fort Worth. MedStar is, separate from Fort Worth, and it's a system that was started in 1986. And it is a public utility, but it has struggled with rising costs and declines in reimbursements. And so council members are taking a closer look at some alternative models. And in this article, they describe the various models that a consultant has analyzed and brought forward 4 potential EMS models that the city could take a look at. The first would closely resemble the current public utility model, but the city council would take on a greater governance role with MedStar. The second would create a fire-based model where either civilians or sworn fire department personnel would handle EMS services. The third would establish a new third service within city governance. So we have police and fire, and then we would have EMS, and it would be similar governance as those two that are already in Fort Worth. And the fourth would switch EMS systems to a private contractor model. The consultant has done a high-level cost estimate for each of these models, and there is a huge range in cost from $3.2 million to $63 million. And each estimate assumes an 8-minute response time. So I guess there's some standards by which we want to make sure that we stick to. But they looking at all these different things, they're going to talk to the various folks, and they're going to look at opportunities to weed out efficiencies and duplicate efforts and all of that. But these different opinions are spelled out in greater detail than what I just did with the titles there. And I've asked a couple people who have been involved in the city what their thoughts were, and nobody's given me an answer. So this will be a decision, I guess, that the council makes.
And I remember when we were talking about it way back in the day, it was, Fort Worth was setting aside, it says here in like around September, $4.2 million in MedStar. But MedStar has a for-profit piece. Like it's not a nonprofit or part of, so it's like you're helping fund something that it actually operates and make profit. So the challenging part for here to me is like this relationship, if it's going to be a public-private relationship, there needs to be a lot of accountability and a lot of market rate set, but then also if things go bad, because in my opinion, it's just crazy for me to think that if I need to call an ambulance because something bad happened, that the person who's dictating that success rate of me getting to a hospital is also operated off something that where the board's number one focus is profit. That is terrifying.
Yes. I said concerning. You said terrifying.
Because that is the situation we're in our healthcare system in America. And so I'm not even blaming MedStar and Fort Worth for this. It's just this is the situation that we're in. And we should all be concerned about this clear as we all might need MedStar one day in our life. So, but it also shows you a lot of the cost and the issue is because Fort Worth's too dang big.
They also serve other communities. So that has to be worked into this as well, because currently MedStar contracts with other communities outside of Fort Worth.
Yeah, and the community one, though, to me is also kind of terrifying. Like someone is just volunteering, giving their time to be a MedStar person, like also kind of terrifies me, though, too.
I'm not sure that's
what that would mean. The first option was to closely resemble the current public utility model, but the Fort Worth City Council will take on a greater governance role. The second would create a fire-based model where either civilians or sworn in fire department.
No, I think what it is, it's both, because you have civilians and fire, because you're not going to, staff a whole ambulance with people who have the level of what a firefighter has. Some of those people are going to be driving the ambulance, and they don't necessarily need to have all of the other qualifications that a firefighter would have. Many firefighters have paramedic training and all of that. But the reason it's civilian too is that you don't need to have everybody.
But this will be their job.
It would,
Civilian is like they would get hired.
Right.
I guess how it was written, it sounded like this, like there's a volunteer thing that we're gonna.
No. This would be their job. It would be hiring people who are not sworn firefighters to be part of the team.
Okay, that one. So I like that one. That one makes sense. If I was in an emergency and I needed someone to call and the fire people were coming, I'd feel good about that.
Well, let me tell you, everything that I've witnessed, this is anecdotal, but the fire department is always there first. Yeah. When I had my little crash where somebody pulled out in front of me and I called 911. Now, it might have helped that I was literally 2 blocks from the fire station in my neighborhood when this happened. But I think fire is often the first ones on the scene, and MedStar was second, and the police were the third to show up when I had that little incident.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, it's interesting that they put in here what different communities have done. I assume that the report to the council before they make their decision is going to have, more information than is in this article, and they will make the best decision for Fort Worth after this in-depth study that cost over $100,000.
Yeah. Hey, so here we go. We're going to move into the next story, which is the Fort Worth City and Keller school officials to meet about motel near Basswood Elementary. This story is what made me pitch her to move this to the big story, because this was just going to be your loss. But then I just heard you talk about it. I'm like, no, we need to talk about all these weird cases that are just like things we're doing in a city to just seem odd. And this Keller School, Basswood Elementary, seems like one of them.
Yeah. So there's a Fort Worth Report article talking about how some Basswood Elementary parents, which is part of Keller ISD, is asking that a Studio 6 motel not be built. This Studio 6 extended stay motel is proposed to be less than 300 feet from Keller ISD Elementary School. And the city of Fort Worth said that ultimately this was allowed because the zoning allows for this construction to happen. The owner doesn't think that this is a problem and shares that he was raised in a hotel and that there's a solid client base in the area, and that he doesn't think that it is a dangerous or scary thing that needs to be fought. There's a couple of elements in here that make this a little problematic. There's some who are saying that they were not properly notified, and that some of the notifications, instead of going to the current superintendent of Keller ISD, went to a past superintendent. Now, I would think that you would have an email address that stays with the superintendent's office and not an individual's name, so that you don't run into having to change the notification contacts every time somebody in that role moves. And then they also said that some of the neighborhood associations indicated that they were not notified of this, because when this did go through zoning, where it went to the zoning commission and to the city council, the council member for the area actually thanked the developer for going through the process and working with neighborhoods, and there was no one there in opposition. But then when construction started, a lot of people showed up and started expressing concern. But one of the other things and there's a lot of fear being expressed in here, like that there's going to be sex offenders near the school, and that this could lead to a school shooting, and that there is going to be people coming over and playing on the playground at night from the hotel that might leave things that would be dangerous to the students. And I've been in many zoning commission meetings and city council meetings where people who are upset about something and throw in everything and the kitchen sink as to what they think. And when it comes to safety of children, that's usually a hot button issue that people put in there. What I found really upsetting, but I've seen it happen, is that during the meeting, parents were screaming at the council member and the representative of the area and the developer of the hotel, saying that they weren't notified until it started, and said, "Didn't you think it was strange that there was no opposition at all to this proposed change?" So again, back to notifications, I think that is something that is concerning, because the city goes beyond the required by law notification boundary. And they rely upon neighborhood associations to let residents in those neighborhoods know. And so if you're not involved in your neighborhood association, you may not get notification. But the city of Fort Worth also now has the ability to sign up for individual zoning notices for every council district. So I actually get emails from all of the council districts with all of the zoning changes. And you as an individual can do that now too, so that you can see every single zoning change that comes down the pike. So I think that the other interesting point, and tying into the importance of planning in a city, is that this property was originally owned by Home Depot, and a Home Depot was built, and then part of the property that was zoned light industrial was sold to the Keller School District, and they opted to build an elementary school in an area zoned light industrial. Schools can be built, I think, in pretty much every zoning category. Is it smart to put a school in industrial zoning? This story would tell you probably not if you're concerned about industrial development next to a school. A hotel being industrial, I think a lot of people just that's a higher impact use. And so the city actually has a higher zoning qualification that has to happen if you are putting a hotel next to, say, single family residential. So I think there's issues on a lot of different sides on this, but again, it circles back to the importance of planning.
Yeah, because this is already not by a neighborhood. It's already out in industrial.
Yeah,
And
which
so,
goes back to our previous story about where schools should be located.
Yeah.
So I think the council member mentioned, this is in an industrial area and not in the middle of nowhere. Well, I wouldn't want a school with nothing around it. I would want a school close to the students it serves, so that you're not dealing with all of the transportation issues and the being on farm to market roads that don't have the ability to absorb all that traffic.
Yeah. And it's just hard to say motels where bad would happen when you have drive-throughs and McDonald's and Taco Bells and Walmart's. Like, everything leads to other commerce, leads to people coming in and out.
Oh, and I could tell you some stories about Walmarts that were built and schools that thought that terrible things were going to happen, and neighborhoods that came out and said that they didn't want that. And there's a lot of concern. It's interesting in the state of Texas, where we're very focused on individual property rights, that a lot of people have a lot to say about what other people do with their property that is not owned by them.
Yeah. And to me, this is a show of a model where the school went to cheap land, it seems. And it kind of shows to me the same examples when we choose to pick sprawl over community. We're like, oh, this nice handy house in this land looks nice. So then you buy it because you're leading with cheap affordability. And these are the consequences of when we don't think about what's the cost of our quality of life when it comes to living, learning, and leisure. Kept it all L's there for us.
There you go.
Let's move into two stories where you feel like planning has actually done us well. At least I know one of them. The next generation transit planning for North Texas moves forward.
So yeah, I did. It was I shared on my social media today because I had a Facebook memory pop up that showed a transit plan that the city of Fort Worth had back in 2014, 2015 timeframe. And then it kind of made me think about the fact that we are now talking about next generation transit planning for North Texas moving forward. This is a Dallas Morning News article, but I think it's been covered by a couple of publications. But consultants will examine how to enhance transit in the area by 2050 as officials plan for growth. This is a study that the North Central Texas Council of Governments is announcing, where they will look at critical transportation investments needed to plan for the growth of DFW. The council's executive board has approved $2.2 million worth of contracts to consult to help design a transit system that serves residents who will live outside of existing transit authority service areas in the future. So when I served on the Regional Transportation Council, this was a conversation that we had back then, and that was that there is DART, which is the Dallas Transit Authority, there's the Denton Transit Authority, DCTA, and there is Trinity Metro. And all of them are separate. And so there's some discussion that working together, which Dallas and Trinity Metro, DART and Trinity Metro do work together on the TRE that goes back and forth between Dallas and Fort Worth. But there maybe needs to be more collaboration on these transit authorities and tying them into some of the cities that don't currently fund the existing transit authorities to make sure that we are planning together. And so they're looking at doing Regional Transit 2.0, a study aimed at supporting sustainable development throughout the 12-county Dallas-Fort Worth region and serving cities that lack the sales tax capacity to join the Dallas area transit, the Denton County Transportation Authority, or Trinity Metro. There are 13 DART member cities, and DCTA, which is Denton, has 1, 2, 3, looks like. And then in Fort Worth, it's just Fort Worth and Blue Mound. Although Trinity Metro has different types of agreements with Grapevine and North Richland Hills that support TexRail. But I see this as planning, and it could be good. We can strengthen partnerships between the existing transit authorities, and it also speaks to looking at land use and all of those types of planning initiatives so that we're not just trying to plan transit to support an unsupportable, sprawly way of developing. So I think this is highlighting the importance of planning, and hopefully we can move forward and move the needle and have some better outcomes.
Well, what's interesting, this also goes into the final planning one we talk about, where this was a Haley Samsel environmental reporter story in the Fort Worth report. Transportation is polluting North Texas air. Officials seek about $200 million for solutions.
Yeah, and this is kind of like if we had done some of this regional planning, and we have done regional planning as we've gone along, but obviously we have not reached the end result that we need to, because we have been non-attainment or close to non-attainment for our air quality for a long time. And this article is talking about how our area and the officials in our area are going to be seeking some money for solutions. And maybe had we done things a little bit better in the past and had a more robust multimodal system where not everybody was driving in their cars, we might not be facing the pollution issues that we're facing, but we are. So this is finalizing an air quality improvement plan that the Council of Governments, again, staff has revealed in its initial ideas for reducing pollution across the region. And they're going to be moving forward and hopefully getting some, and being cognizant of state and federal funding, and trying to make sure that all of that is done in the most non-redundant ways to serve the whole area. And I think that there's a public meeting opportunity listed in here, although when I clicked on the link, it said it was more a meeting for city or staff. So I'm not sure it's open to the public, but definitely need, if there are opportunities, and I think the Council of Governments has had some both virtual and in-person opportunities for people to chime in on the proposals that they have. But as Michael Morris indicated on here, there's multiple reasons to be in favor of this, regardless of the position that you're coming from. If you're worried about climate change, you should be interested. If you're into attainment of an ozone standards, you should be interested. If you don't want to come into non-attainment for particulate matter standards, you should be interested. If you're interested in funding transportation and air quality projects, then you should be interested. So I think what he's saying is basically this is a way for many people to come together and move forward in a positive way.
Yeah, and that's where I think great way to wrap it up, where we all need to come together, from the private sector to public government entities to the people, and it's us all keeping us accountable. In Fort Worth and Texas as a whole, we play this fine game between, too much regulation, so I'm going to just go build out somewhere else without, that's cheaper and easier. And then some of these cases we just talked about come and bite us in the butt. And I actually think our policies in Fort Worth are pretty easy compared to other states. So I don't know why you'd be so, wanting to be, to be more involved and to participate with your government and making sure that things work. So I think all of this, from transportation to air quality
to zoning,
where schools are,
to planning,
where schools are located, to if you want to, leave Fort Worth's ETJ, all of it is. We got to think more about what do we want to show up to as a community. So we're going to move into wins and losses. Losses we start off with, which is our losses for the week for the city. And then we end with wins to end on a high note. And what is your loss?
So my loss is actually not anything to do with Fort Worth, but I think it's good when people in the region have good people. And this week it was announced that the Dallas city manager, TC Broadnack, has announced his resignation. And I have had the opportunity to meet the city manager in Dallas, and I have watched from afar some of the work that he's done. And I know people who have worked with him in Dallas, and I definitely think that this is a loss for Dallas. And I don't know what his plans are in the future, if he's planning to stay in the area. But if he were to leave the area, I think that would be a loss for the region as well. And so I'm sorry to see him go.
Yeah, it's also a lot going on in Dallas. It's a lot of trauma in Dallas in the D-Town boogie. My loss, I really didn't fully think one through because we hit a lot of stories that were kind of a loss. But I guess my loss and win, I'll just kind of put it together because the win is that Juneteenth Museum got $2 million of funding from BNSF, which is also doing a lot of investing in their own building where their headquarters is to actually beef up their involvement in Fort Worth and Tarrant County. But I just think it's a win that Juneteenth Museum got $2 million. That they're closer to about $34 million now. They need to get to $70 million. And so I just think it's a win that community partners like BNSF is participating. I don't know why any other large entity wouldn't do the same and match what BNSF did, especially if you're about the community and the people we serve and the history of our local people and that impression it has on national and the ROI of Black tourism in America. More people want to go visit Black spaces than Vietnam War museums if you're under 40. So at the end of the day, this is a great future planning for Black tourism as well. So that is all a win. The loss is that there needs to be more of this, I guess, by our people. And so I hope BNSF can push the people around them to do the same.
Well, there was a representative from BNSF, and I can't remember her name, but she was at the unveiling of the mural that Community Frontline had at the blank space over in the Hanley area that I went to last weekend. And so they seem to be getting out in the community, and that's a good example to set for other corporations in our area to support those things.
Yeah. BNSF needs to teach the oil and gas crew people how to build PR and community relations. I think they are very inclusive, very thoughtful. They do a lot of community. I got to participate in their technology day where they do a technology day and they bring kids from all across the communities where inner city kids are getting to go out and see the technology at BNSF, see what they're learning. They do a lot of stuff like that. And I just don't know why we don't have more of that from the oil and gas party, who seems to not want to invest in communities and spaces like Blank Space or Juneteenth Museum. And I think if you're going to be successful long term, you're going to have to start doing that more strategically.
So you did your win and your loss together. So does that mean you're done? And
yes.
We're just ready for my win?
Yeah, you're bringing us home like you did with the big story.
My win, and this is very timely, is a little self-serving as well. The nonprofit that I work for, Community Design Fort Worth, is having a design talk or panel discussion on one of the items that we suggested when public meetings were first being held by TxDOT, our Highway Transportation Authority here in Texas, about some possible improvements to Interstate 30 from the west. And one of the ideas that we suggested that they do is hopefully utilizing some of the federal dollars that are available for stitching neighborhoods back together that have been divided by highway construction that occurred in the past, that oftentimes ran along red line mapping and were very systematically and done purposefully to divide neighborhoods. But one of our suggestions was to take a look at decking over I-30 in the location of Arlington Heights High School, which used to have a large lawn out in front of it. And now there is a skinny little pedestrian bridge enclosed in chain link fencing that students either walk across that or walk across Hewlin Bridge and other bridges across the freeway that are not pleasant environments for pedestrians. I have walked on all of those facilities. And so a group of architects and landscape architects that partner with Community Design Fort Worth have come up with just some concept plans that we are sharing with the community, that we're also sharing with TxDOT, that as we move forward, and this is an area of highway improvement that hasn't even been funded yet in the 10-year plan. So these are way in the future concepts that could come to life, but you need to start talking about these things and making people aware of them far in advance, because when funding does become available, if those public meetings were held way prior and no one showed up, then TxDOT can just march along with their plans and be like, well, you weren't here in those public meetings. So we have been in those public meetings, and we are taking a step even further to suggest some concepts and ideas. And this design talk will be held on February 28th, which is Wednesday at 5:30, with the talk starting at 6 o'clock at Arlington Heights High School in their auditorium. And you can go to our website and find the link, or EJ will put it in the show notes, where there's no cost to it. We ask people to register just so we can see what numbers we're hopefully anticipating. We had 55 people already signed up earlier this week, and I know a couple of classes that are coming from UTA, and I've encouraged the principal at the school to invite students to come as well, and hopefully we'll have a great turnout for that.
You're right. That little intersection right there is wild.
I mean, I know all kinds of people that live in Arlington Heights that would love to be able to go to Central Market.
Yeah.
And, getting back and forth across that. I've walked it because I walked from my house all the way to the cultural district.
Yeah.
And so I've gone all through that area, and definitely there could be improvements to the comfort level and the safety level of all of that.
All righty. Well, look at that, guys. We just had a full episode. We missed you. We are going to be back at it next week. Thank you so much for listening to the show. We'll see you next week and a friend. You guys been great.